Hey, Brad.
Hello, everyone. I'm working on it. It's a heck of a day today.
You look like Lieutenant Stephen Rogers tonight, my friend.
Yeah, I put on the old red tie, the suit jacket, got the two little pins there. We might as well celebrate both countries because North America seems to be in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, it's just what I was talking about. So I want to talk to you about these curriculums that are being forced into our public schools and libraries. I know that you have done a lot of research and a lot of interviews as a father yourself and as a journalist as well in the last couple of years regarding this. Do you want to go back to the beginning of when your interest first got you to actually start doing this?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that happened was my daughter came home from high school in grade 10, and she brought home um, some pictures that she took of a document that, well, a survey really from school that she was told that it wasn't mandatory if your parents had signed the form. And if your parents didn't sign the form, then you're going to have to take it. She was forced to take it. Well, when she was taking it, she decided to take some screenshots with her phone and send those to me. And once I got a hold of those, they were asking some pretty obscure questions. You know, it wasn't just about my daughter's sexuality, whether she was trans or straight or bi or poly or any of that stuff. It was they started asking about us parents, and they were delving into my daughter's, brain about what her mom and I both bring to the table. So, where were your parents educated? Where do your parents work? How much money are they making? Between, it was a range. You're going to go from 100,000 or more, or 100,000 or less.
And wait,
Pigeonholing.
this questionnaire was being put upon her by her school?
Yeah, by the Louis Riel School Division. That's correct. We actually
Wow.
did a show on that, Shadow, and it was about the company called the Learning Bar Inc. And that was a company out of New Brunswick that had an educator there who was involved in the University of British Columbia. He's been involved in a couple of other universities out east. And he originally started his company out of Delaware, this Learning Bar Inc. And the questions were coming directly from that company because at the bottom of the screenshots that my daughter took, it had their name down there. So I started researching the Learning Bar Inc. and I was able to find out who they are, what they are. And I was wondering, where does this information go? Like, who actually takes it and tabulates it and counts it and tries to, I guess, decipher what this all means? And I asked that question of the superintendent. I've asked it of trustees. I've asked it of the principal as well. Nobody seems to be able to answer it except for the word stakeholders. Well, there's a lot of different stakeholders out there. Which are we?
Well, you know what? It's interesting when we hear the word stakeholders. That comes directly from Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. And I think that's the guy who started bringing this into the consciousness of the governments who now start using the term stakeholders. And nobody really seems to know what it means. So we have to figure it out for ourselves. And the media never seems to ask who the stakeholders are. What is your interpretation of who the stakeholders are
I
exactly?
have asked who the stakeholders are. And, again, I get a little bit of a railroad every time I ask somebody new, but I had the chance to ask a former teacher. And I said, who do you believe the stakeholders are? And, what she had to say was she believes it's the parents, it's the school board, it's the government. And I was like, well, where do they derive this from? Like, why would they think the government and the school board have that power?
Well, interestingly, it would be the parents, because if you're going to put all three of those groups together, the school board, the parents, and the government, it would have to be the parents that agree with what they're trying to implement in the schools. But what about the parents that don't agree? Why
Correct.
are we the ones being left on the outside looking in? What's your take? And we're seeing school trustees being disciplined and restricted and suspended even all across the country. The latest one is in Red Deer, Alberta now, I'm sure you know.
Yeah, I do.
How is this happening? These are duly elected, democratically elected people.
We've been infiltrated all across this country through our government, our schools, from kindergarten all the way right through to universities. We've got a real problem on our hands. The infiltration of the ideology has been spread for many, many years. I know that the trans ideology, for example, started back in 2010, and started to ramp up in 2013. And here we are in 2023, where it's full on, no stopping. We've got this, and they're going to go ahead and just continue to make this happen. But I guess when you go back in time to when this all started and who the stakeholders are and all of that, it's really quite interesting to think that the parents, the government, and even the province, or even the school board, being stakeholders, that having that power. Who gave that to them? I witnessed something the other day that I was going to bring up a minute ago that's really interesting, because I saw it said superintendent and CEO of one of the school divisions. And I went, CEO? Where do they get CEO, like chief executive officer, from, when this isn't a corporation? Or is it now, Shadoe? That's a question I think we need to pose to Christian Mikulik.
So, where is this coming from? Is it coming from the UN? Is it coming from the World Economic Forum? And is it being sprinkled down into countries and then states and provinces and localities? Uh, where, like, we know people in this province and others who have been trying to fight these curriculums. They
Absolutely.
go to school boards, they speak to school trustees, and they get shut down at every turn just because they offer a differing opinion. They do not like these books being available to kids who are 5 years old or 6 years old. They don't like the curriculums that are being implanted. But where is it coming from? How do we fight back against it? I know there's many people who are trying to fight back at the grassroots level, but that doesn't seem to be working so well right now unless we can muster more support.
You're right. Grassroots level is a good place to start. It's a good place to get educated. It's a good place to gain some really solid knowledge to be able to help yourself communicate going forward, whether it's with a school board trustee or a teacher, principal. I believe this comes from the World Economic Forum. I believe that they're going to wipe out school eventually. They're going to say that there will be no more, just like businesses. They've done their best to wipe out the businesses. They've done their best to wipe out all kinds of industries across our great country. And I believe that teachers are just in that lineup and waiting to happen. The reason I say that so confidently is really because these people from the World Economic Forum have already planned out a vision. And if you go to their website, you'll be able to see what their vision of education. And going forward, it's going to be an online form of education, is what they're saying. They're saying that the World Economic Forum will provide their own teaching staff that will communicate the messages that they want to provide to students going through school in the future. That, again, just provides them with providing their own ideology, giving the kids their own lesson plans in their own way. And I think that, we don't need education decided by some, and I'm going to say this out loud, by some Nazi in Switzerland. And I call him a Nazi regularly because that's what he is. His dad was, his mom was. They worked and developed products for the Germans during the war. Klaus came out of that as a child, got well educated along the way because mommy and daddy were paid by the Reich. And the next thing you know, here we are. This guy's been working on this for over 70 years by himself with a team of individuals who are all, I'm going to say, brainwashed too. They're all like-minded. They all sit in that line of, we can bring this utopia to the world. And we're just not ready for it as a society. You can't get rid of oil. You can't get rid of cars or gas. You can't. But they seem to think we can, or they can. And it's not working. They keep trying to force it. You saw what happened in the States the other day with those electric cars. The lady was taking a trip across the country. The cars all broke down, couldn't go any farther, had to wait 3 hours to put more electricity juice in it. And like round and round we go, man. Why are they doing this to us? What's the ultimate goal here? it's not just about education. It's not just about the environment and the climate change they continue to preach on us. It was minus 30 20 years ago. It's minus 33 today. It was minus 33 20 years ago, too. It hasn't changed.
What
They
about
just
the wildfires, man? What about the wildfires?
direct energy weapons, buddy. Directed energy weapons. Maui was a good example of that. Lahaina, no question about it. You can watch one of my videos. There's a great episode on directed energy weapons on Wake Up Canada News. Look us up under bitshoot.com. You'll find all that information there. Now, going back to the school for a minute, Shadoe, just because I don't think I kind of got off topic there, but as soon as I start talking about the World Economic Forum, just like most of us, you can take that in a million different directions, the shit they're putting down on us.
Yep, I
So,
agree.
so with regards to the schools now, where does this CEO come from? Is it now a corporation? And if it is a corporation, when did we parents sign off on that to happen? It's our tax dollars, it's our building, it's our land. I believe that wholeheartedly, that it's our money that pays for all of this. And for them to think that this is now their corporation and they make all the rules and they can block parents from coming to school board meetings and fire trustees and teachers for making, social media posts or comments about their own feelings. Well, that's a great way to show your communistic side, isn't it?
Well, they do use the tactics of Antifa. They do lie, smear, repeat. Lie, smear, repeat. And this has happened in the case of the school trustee, Francine Champagne, who was suspended in the Louis Riel school division. And
Yep.
the people who have gone to try and object to this, or have a debate with the school trustees, have been now locked out of the building and told they've been trespassed. The police will escort them off the premises if they show up. That's not even legal, is it?
No, it sure isn't. Their bylaws do not allow them to have that kind of power or anything over anyone. They're abusing their power. They're abusing their policies. They are railroading the parents. And you know what? We parents, we have legitimate concerns. We believe that we should be heard. The concerns, and I'm a parent of Louis Riel School Division as well. So for me, it's not like I'm, barking about them because and not being a part of it. I'm embedded in it. I had two kids go through that. My kid, his future for hockey was destroyed because of COVID and the mandates and the mandatory vaccinations that they put us through. And, my son had to walk away from hockey. He had scholarships in the States waiting for him, but he couldn't go. And then while they dropped the COVID mandates and everything else, but by then he's 2 years behind everybody else because he didn't play for 2 seasons. So thanks for that, Teach.
Let me ask you, you've done extensive research and many interviews into this curriculum, the Sochi 123, but it's called something different in different provinces, right?
And around the world, yeah, it sure is. But in provinces here in Canada, it is the Soji 123 indoctrination program, no question.
What are the most impactful interviews and the most knowledgeable people that you've had the opportunity to speak with?
There's the other show that I do as well, which is called Unmasking the Trans Movement. And you can find us at unmaskingthetransmovement.com, where we provide a world of resources for parents alike, grandparents, and children. You know, with the episodes that I've done on either Wake Up Canada or Unmasking the Trans Movement, I think I've probably done a lot more discussions on Unmasking the Trans Movement with regards to the topic of this whole ideology and stuff. And one of the guys that I think really kind of drove home a message that would be crystal clear to anybody that's listening is Alvin Louis. And Alvin is an illusionist. And because he's an illusionist, he understands the illusion that's being pulled on us and our children with this movement.
That's interesting. That is really interesting.
And he speaks it very clearly in a way that, anyone will be able to understand. It's not medical, it's not clinical, it's not anything like that at all. There's no trauma involved. This is about targeting in on, when this happens, this is the result. And you see how it ties together. And he ties it together just so well. You can find that interview on Unmasking the Trans Movement at BitChute. So our bitchute.com/unmasking the trans movement. Look for our episode with Alvin Louie. There's 2 episodes there. It's a 2-part episode, 30 minutes each one. And he's going to walk you through everything that you as a parent need to know. It's not just the illusion that he brings up or talks about, or the way that he talks about the way that they're changing the wording. And when I say changing the wording, I'm really talking about changing the definition of words and diversity, inclusivity, equity, family friendly. They're not the same as what everybody out there believes them to be. They have inspired a new meaning for those 4 or 5 words that is troublesome. If you knew what they really meant now on the ideology side of things, you'd be saying, wow, it's not what I thought it was. I recommend everybody go look those words up, because the definition of that word has changed. You know, one thing they say, Shadoe, is you can't really change the law, but you know what you can do? You can change the definition of the words within the law to make it suit your need. And that's exactly what they've done here. The trans movement has manipulated the language to suit their need.
Did Alvin Louis talk about the art of misdirection that is being used on us, aside from the changing of the definitions, which seems to be happening with the medical industry as well? And I call them the medical industry these days as opposed to the medical profession. So it's sleight of hand. You
Yeah.
will watch this piece so you don't notice that piece. Nothing up my sleeve, nothing under my hat, right?
The closer you look, the less you'll see. Right?
Absolutely.
So you're absolutely correct. And he does explain that illusion of it all, how they're sugarcoating it to be family friendly, inclusive, and diverse and fun and all these things. It's a fad. That's the bottom line. It's a fad. It's like you wanting to wear bell bottoms in the late 70s like I did. Platform boots like Gene Simmons, man. Like we all wanted that too, but we didn't all get to dress that way, and we sure as hell didn't cut off our genitals or anything to make us look like a rock star.
Yeah, I mean, mullets were one thing, right?
That's right.
This whole thing is something completely different.
I wish I had
Brad,
mine back, man.
Listen, I wanted to. Right, me too. I wanted to ask you about the video you released. I think it was back in, was it June, about the unvaccinated?
Yeah,
That has been viralized, baby. I mean, this thing is all over the place. I can't turn left without still seeing it pop up every now and again.
You're right. I ended up with a Tucker Carlson moment for myself, and not that it boosts my ego or anything. I'm just glad that people were able to hear it and connect with me on it. I got that email from somebody, I don't even remember who. It said anonymous. This was written by anonymous, and it had this big long, piece to it. And I went, oh, this resonates with me. I seem to feel it. I seem to think that I'm going to be able to convey this message in a very powerful way when I speak it. And when I got into it, I was like, okay, I only read like about 3 or 4 sentences, and I went, downstairs, let's go, hit, turn it all on, get the set going, turn on the TV studio, and let's go. So it turned into something that I just felt so passionate about. It was the very first take. It wasn't like I read it 100 times and then presented it or cut the good one. It was like me sitting down going, here we go, say this and mean it. And hopefully everybody else will kind of grasp onto it. I found out later that the individual who wrote that piece was a member of parliament in the UK, and also a soldier, I guess, who put that piece together. And I didn't find out until after I had done it. But, for 63 million views, I think we're pretty happy too.
Nice. We have the big March for Kids coming up all across the country. Next Wednesday, most localities are starting their march at 9:00. Well, at least they're starting to meet at 9:00 that morning. It's a work day, so there's a lot of people who are saying, "I can't come. I've got to work." There's people who are still on the fence about it. There's people who are scared that if they show their face, they're going to be chastised at work. They might even lose their jobs. What message do you have to people, knowing all that you know about what is being perpetrated on our kids, about these people coming, whether they're scared or not?
You can't be scared anymore. It's too late for that. Remember, it's not our kids' fight, it's our fight. I use that on one of my shows, Unmasking the Trans Movement, all the time. And I do that for a reason, because now's the time. We have to speak up. Um, our kids are in jeopardy here. Having grandchildren is in jeopardy here. Um, it doesn't seem like, that kind of a statement isn't the here and now, meaning that it's going to affect you today, but what doesn't affect you today typically does affect you down the road somewhere. And the more this ideology gets beat into our kids like they're trying to do, the less chance we have of coming out of it. So, look, the percentages on this all are very slim and none. Okay. This is such a minority compared to the rest of humanity, that we're bowing and caving to such a small percentage of individuals who have mental health issues. And, Dr. John Euler, Dr. Ann Gillies, rather, John Euler, trauma therapist on Unmasking the Trans Movement, both agree and preach this out, that, these individuals need help. And if your kid gets dragged into this, they need help too. There's a lot of things that drive this, all from autism to bipolar to Asperger's. Those are just some of the scenarios that people are caught up in with physical conditions, medical conditions, and then again played on to be involved in the movement. So they're
Interesting that I
vulnerable.
sort of interrupt you. The three things you just mentioned there are all side effects of vaccination.
Yes, they are too. Yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
And again, I'm not going to blame it on vaccination, because this has been going since, well, a very long time. What you do behind your closed doors, I believe you should continue to do behind your closed doors, but it doesn't need to come into my front door if I don't want it to, and it shouldn't be coming into the schools. So, go ahead, be gay, be lesbian. We never had a problem with these individuals before. I'm not against the LGBTQ plus community. What I'm against is you continue to force this down our kids' throats. So, Shadoe, we've been battling for quite a while. Manitobans, Canadians, North Americans, you've seen it in school boards across the US. You've heard about it starting to ramp up here at school boards across Canada. You've seen the marches. You've seen us all stand there and, well, go toe to toe with the other side, the trans movement, this ideology. As you stand there, the numbers on our side have not been strong. If you were at 50 Monterey a couple of weeks ago at the Louis Riel School Division, you would have noticed there was about 20 people there. If you went over to the St. Mary's one after that, you would have noticed a very limited number of our folks were there that feel strongly against indoctrinating our children this way. Their movement bussed people in, had all kinds of support from the trans community, all kinds of parents out there and kids alike. It became a rainbow party on the Louis Riel school parking lot, with the chair, Sandy Nemeth, in the middle of it all, outside partying it up with them, while they're banning us parents from even having a conversation with them going forward.
They're government funded and they're very well organized. I wonder where that comes from.
Right. Exactly. So do I. And I think it's George Soros a little bit. I think that our own government plays into it as well. We have NGOs that are being funded by big companies that are pumping cash into this movement. And BlackRock, Vanguard, I mean, they're all part of this all. And, you can't go without mentioning those people. Look them up. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please, there's so much information online. You've probably heard the sentence, you can't trust what you see on the internet. Well, guess what? There's a lot that you can trust. And all you have to do is do your due diligence, look it up, and you'll see for yourself that this information is there. And you will be able to speak like we are, in a very confident manner, knowing full well that what you're saying is actually legitimate.
You know, it's interesting that you talk about BlackRock and Vanguard. There was a video that came out a while back, 3 months ago, an interview with Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock. I'm going to throw it up here just so that you guys can see what Brad was just talking about. Watch, this is Larry Fink right here. Watch what he has to say in this.
The point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year. And what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities, and we're going to have to force.
There is a guy who is controlling $11 trillion in the world. That's, I think, about 1/8 of the money on the planet, talking about forcing behaviors on people.
Yep.
If that's not despotic, I don't know what is. And he is not an elected person. He is the CEO of an investment firm. But he controls so much money that he can force companies like Walmart or any other large corporation to change their behaviors and force behaviors on their employees and even their customers because he controls their funding.
That's right.
It's amazing.
Absolutely. He's a bad man, and his ideology is driven under greed. Part of Klaus Schwab's evil plan. They're in this all together. They're backing each other. They're supporting each other. They've got their policies and procedures in place. Had a lot of time to develop their game plan. And, how do you fight a silent enemy or an invisible enemy like this that's around the world, on the other side of the world, meaning, how do we go at somebody like that and stop them? You can't drive to their house. You can't arrest them necessarily from us here in Canada. Give me the money. I'd love to go meet these guys face to face. You give me a ticket to Davos and I'll be on that plane before midnight tonight. And I'm happy to go and lay down what I think about Klaus and his other Nazi friends.
It's interesting that, as you say, such a very small percentage of people are controlling the world. And I think it stops when we stop it and not before. So
agreed.
If we show up next Wednesday, no matter what city or town we happen to be in, we are doing this for the kids, obviously. There is a larger meaning behind this, as we've been talking about for the past 20 or so minutes. Right. This one is for the kids and for the parents. Let's not forget the parents. They deserve to know what their kids are being taught in schools. But it will make such an impact, I'm hoping, upon governments. And I'm not even sure how much control governments have anymore, provincial or federal for that matter. But at least it's a start. When we can go out and show 10,000 people in Winnipeg, maybe 15, 20,000 people in Calgary, maybe 20,000 people in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal, they are going to take notice of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's going to take notice on the 20th. I think that we're going to generate some results here, some motion of movement that's going to allow people to want to learn more and expand their education on this topic and this issue. And, it comes through people's doors every day and they're blindsided by it. They didn't see it coming. They don't see the changes in their kids along the way because they're too busy working 2 jobs, trying to pay the bills, trying to cook supper. My dog came up to me yesterday and had her ball in her mouth and she wanted to play. And I was on my cell phone and I looked down at her and I said, "Do you want to play with your ball?" And she started wagging her tail. And okay, just give me a second. I'm going to finish. And so I keep typing, and I put my head back into my phone and I keep typing away. And she's still looking at me, and I glance at her, and she drops the ball and she puts her head down and she lies down on the floor waiting for me. Now, that just goes to show how you can affect an animal by being on your phone too much. I want to show you now what happens when it's your son going, Mom, 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 what do you want? Mom, what? Enough. I'm trying to talk to my friend here. Mom, I want to know an answer to a question. Okay, in a minute. Mom, I just want to know why they keep telling me I'm a girl in school. Mom is in her thing. Little boy walks away. Little boy never gets the answer. Mom's too busy. Mom's too busy messing with her phone, going through whatever she doesn't need to go through when her little boy is asking a question and she should be paying attention to him. How many times have adults this day and age blown off their kids for the cell phone? I bring that up because I believe that that's happening on a regular basis. I believe that your kids are asking for help and you're not, as a parent, recognizing their call. You don't know what to look for. You're not sure of what's really going on. And you need to have an open discussion with them. Without open discussion, you're getting nowhere with your kids. Teach them, guide them, give them the meaning of right and wrong, give them the meaning of you have options to everything. There's another way to do things always. You know, Shadoe, I said it just yesterday. There was a book as a child that I remember that was pretty poignant. You know, they always say us guys that have been on in the radio business as long as you and I, we have a face for radio, not a face for TV, but here we are. My point is this: the story about the ugly duckling, the children's book, Ugly Duckling, is a story of growing through life, going through puberty for a 13 or 12-year-old or a 10-year-old. As they're going through puberty, what did they look like when they were 7? What did they look like they were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, all the way up to 30? If I showed you a picture of that transition of what somebody started out like when they were 6 or 7 and where they are today, that transition is amazing. It's an amazing, amazing route to take for every single human. Yet these teachers, these educators, and these trans people are all pushing an ideology to say, we can fix this and we can make you better now. And there is no better now. Ride it out. We all had to. There's no way there is more than 2 genders. There's male and there's female. It's X and it's Y, and that's the end of this conversation. Don't like it? Too bad. Look up what's going on in real science, not the fictitious shit that Klaus Schwab wants you to believe.
Brad, thank you for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it. And I'm hoping that we're going to see you next Wednesday at the Forks as we move down to the legislature for the speaking part of the.
You know, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I commend you. I commend your team. I commend all of your organization for everything you're about to do. I commend you for being the bigger man today in everything that I know we discussed earlier. And I want to say that, and that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to get into details, but I thank you, because from the bottom of my heart, this is all about the kids. And I know you believe that too.
I do indeed. And I want to thank you for those words as well. And hopefully everything works out well. I've got my fingers crossed. Thanks, man.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
All right. There is Brad Wilder from Wake Up Canada. You can find him on BitChute. Guys, I'm going to keep you a little bit longer tonight, and there's a reason for that. I told you at the beginning of the show that we've got video from Dr. David Martin. Now, this is, I said 26 minutes earlier, it's only 23:35. But it's very important that we watch this. He is going to expose, in case you haven't seen this man before, he has been exposing the shots for the past 2.5 years, ever since they came into being, even longer. Now, here is his latest. Let's all watch it together. Dr. David Martin.
A group, a very small number of criminal industrial conspirators decided to subordinate the entirety of the human population for the purpose of their sinister plans to enrich themselves while impoverishing and killing the rest of humanity. And I'm done being polite. We've long passed polite. When the words acceptable death rate become part of an industrial norm, we have lost the plot of humanity. And that's not my words. Those were the words of the World Health Organization and of Pfizer and of Moderna when they were given the authorization to begin the process of killing human beings in the interest of advancing their goals. Next slide. And I'm also not going to sugarcoat this. This is a criminal cartel. We are acting as though there's some sort of redeemable quality somewhere in some esoteric layer that somehow or another the World Health Organization must have some salutatory benefit. Well, I'm going to tell you, since its formation in the 1940s, the World Health Organization has been nothing more than a criminal cartel that has a sole and singular intent. And I will show you the document that proves what I'm saying. This is not an allegation. This is actually provable by their own words in their own hand. And they use a four-step process to execute every one of their nefarious plans. They begin by planning an exercise, then they go to the business of funding that exercise, then they create the rationale for the thing that they're going to do, and then they deploy and profit from it. And in violation of 15 U.S. Code Section 19, which for those of you listening, coincidentally started with the Clayton Act in the same year that the World Health Organization in the United States, 1913, the same year the World Health Organization's progenitors also started. So I find it fascinating that we passed the Clayton Act in 1913, and we set in motion 110 years ago the criminal conspiracy, which we now call the World Health Organization. 110 years later. And in violation of TIFU, or TEFU, I don't even know how to say it, the TFEU, the treaty allegedly for the functioning of the European Union, which I think needs to now be called the Treaty for the Dysfunctional European Cabal. Article 101 unambiguously lays out the conditions that this was never a public health anything. It was racketeering for the purpose of instilling terror to adapt the behavior of a population, period. That's what it was. That's what it always was. And we can come up with every theoretical argument we want to make about things, but the problem, even with the theory that we had an outbreak of something, is falsifiable for the data from Zurich that shows us that in the year of the death pandemic of the globe, life insurance companies paid $30 billion less in claims. Now, if there's a medical professional or a social professional or anybody else who wants to debate that we could develop a virus cunningly that could find out your bank account, your insurance policy statements, and whether you're paid up on your premiums, that's a big ask. It turns out that the data is unambiguous. We did not have a pandemic. We had genocide. And we need to call it what it is. Next slide. When I say we planned it, let's make sure we understand exactly the not so fine print of the fine print. And I want to call your attention first to the right-hand column of the slide. This is the 2011 data that the World Health Organization, the Wellcome Trust, PATH, and the Gates Foundation did on their wonderful worldwide program for a malaria vaccine for children under the age of 6 months of age. And in their clinical trial, it's helpful to point out that they murdered 66 children in the vaccine group and then cunningly used the term control for a control group in which they murdered 28 children. Now, the reason I said murdered and the reason why I use that term is because it's exactly what it was. because it turns out that this control group was not a saline injection. It was not some sort of innocuous, innocent thing. It was actually a cocktail of other known pathogenic disease-carrying injections. The control group was known to kill people, and the experimental control group was actually theoretically maybe going to kill people. And what we did was we actually went ahead and murdered them all. And cunningly, under Article 5, Section 13, which I've put on this slide, I want you to understand why I said at its formation in 1947, when the WHO was funded and founded, it was funded and founded by people intent to commit a crime because of their own language. Section 13 of Article 5 ends with the following statement: immunity from personal arrest or detention, blah, 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 immunity from legal process of every kind. Now, if you didn't intend to commit a crime, why would you need to give yourself permanent and absolute immunity from every form of prosecution, and it's worse, even investigation for prosecution of every kind? People sit there and pretend, well, that's like diplomatic immunity. Do you realize this isn't even meeting the standard of diplomatic immunity? This is a criminal organization who set in motion their own law to protect themselves against crimes they knew they were going to commit. And when I say they knew they were going to commit, I mean they knew it, because their first director general, none other than Dr. René Sand, who happened to be in the hospitality of the Germans in Dachau in 1940 earlier, in 1947, mysteriously, with the largesse of the Rockefeller Foundation, was nominated to become the first director general of the WHO. And within 5 short years, René Sand decided to authorize the real purpose of the WHO in writing by then Director General Dr. Brock Chisholm, who advocated for population control as its primary objective. Does that sound like public health to anyone in this room? This is not public health. This is the advancement of the same genocidal program that began with the Carnegie Foundation's funding of the eugenics office at Cold Spring Labs in the United States in 1913 under the philanthropy of Andrew Carnegie. People, stop fooling yourself. We debate the leaves on the tree of what we call this pandemic thing, but we're not going to the root. This was an organized crime, racketeering entity set up to give itself first absolute immunity and then execute its plans to make sure it controls who lives, who dies, and who gets any chance at life. And if you think that I am somehow inflating numbers, let me be unambiguous. Under every treatment of tax provision, if I were to tell you that there is an 88% controlling interest of any organization, you might conclude that that actually aggregates into a controlling interest. And it turns out that if we look at the foundation donations to the World Health Organization, 88% of those come from a single organization, the Gates Foundation. That constitutes a violation of every competitivist law in Europe and every competitivist law in the United States. This is absolutely not only not an independent, charitably funded donation, but more importantly, under the tax laws on both sides of the Atlantic, this constitutes directed donations which specifically are forbidden and do not have any place anywhere in the Charter of the World Health Organization or any of the UN-affiliated organizations. When I say this is a crime, I mean it's a tax crime, a racketeering crime, a money laundering crime, and now the crime of racketeering leading to murder and global terrorism. Next slide. I told you that the second thing after they plan it is they fund it. And why don't we use the criminals' language in their own words, because it's the best way to say it. When they actually planned the release of the use of a biologically modified chimera associated with the model derived from coronavirus, they actually said the following: to sustain the funding base beyond the crisis, we need to increase the public understanding for the needful medical countermeasures, such as a pan-influenza or pan-coronavirus vaccine. Now, let me pause for just one moment and remind you that the crisis that they were speaking of was a crisis of diminishing funding. There was no health crisis. This was a crisis of their coffers were starting to run dry. That's the crisis. And let's read on. A key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. That is officially the statement made by the conspiratorial cabal that by that time was the decade of vaccines put in motion in 2011 by the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board of the World Health Organization, and it was the funding base for Peter Daszak's partnership with the chimeric production of pathogens both in North Carolina and in Wuhan. So don't tell me that we have to do an investigation into where this came from. The criminals have admitted to it in their own words. Next slide. And now we get the fun one that no one in Congress is willing to address, which is the elephant in the room. On October the 21st, 2014, despite the multiple conversations between Senator Rand Paul and Anthony Fauci, where we've been told that Rand Paul has done everything he can to put Fauci on the ropes, he has had in his possession the letter that you see on the left. And it is the letter conveniently on NIAID letterhead sent to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which unambiguously states that during the gain-of-function moratorium, which, by the way, if we use the word moratorium, feels like that means you're supposed to stop. Why don't we go ahead and look at two pieces of this letter? First, the second bullet under Project One, which, by the way, was not part of the original grant. This was to look at the novel functions of the virus pathogenesis in vivo. You know what that means? In living systems. The grant was supposed to be clinical simulations and models, but this grant was modified with this letter to say we were going to authorize gain-of-function research during the moratorium in living systems. And then we love the last paragraph of this letter, which conveniently says, as your grant is currently funded, this pause is voluntary. How many times have you met a voluntary moratorium? And the best part about it is that if we look at the very last line, or continue to conduct the applicable gain-of-function research until the end of the currently active budget period. But here comes the problem. You know who is supplying the budget? An indefinite term, unlimited amount contract from DARPA and from NIH. Isn't it convenient to have a perpetually funded project that needs to stop when the money runs out, when you find out that there is no point where the money runs out because there is no end to the thing that has no end? Unless you think that I'm making an allegation, which I'm not, I'm making an accusation. Let's be clear. And there's a big difference. I'm not alleging anything. They actually went to the trouble of telling us that it was going to be the Wuhan virus that was going to get us. As you see on the right-hand side of the screen, published in 2016, March 14th of 2016, the SARS-like Wuhan Institute of Virology Virus 1, and I quote, is poised for human emergence. Does that sound like we're just surprised that something in Wuhan went a little haywire in December of 2019? Or does it feel like we were told, look at Wuhan and look at coronavirus and look at what we've been doing to manipulate coronavirus in Wuhan and at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And lo and behold, we're going to go ahead and tell you that we're ready to release it in 2016. Next slide. We're almost done. And then they created it. Now, all of you know that I am criticized globally for my use of the term biological warfare. I do that because I am credentialed to do that. I happen to be, for the United States government, in the early part of the 2000s and the latter part of the 90s, a person who was sent around the world to look at the proliferation of biological and chemical weapons. I'm acutely familiar with the definition of what a biological warfare agent is in the 18 U.S. Code, the criminal code of violations of biological and chemical weapons. And so my assessment is, in fact, professional and right. And the reason for that is I'm the one credentialed to make that determination for the United States government for many years. That's why I say it. But let's pretend for the moment that I'm just a nut job. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. So why don't we look at what the criminals said themselves, shall we? In 2005, at a conference sponsored by DARPA and the MITRE Corporation, Ralph Baric, the architect of the lethal strand that has been injected into millions and billions of people's arms, that Ralph Baric was sponsored to present the following, and let's go ahead and use his words, presentation: synthetic coronaviruses, biohacking, bio-warfare enabling technologies. Does that sound like a public health distribution program? Does that sound like something that is accidentally misinterpreted to mean something else? Or does biological warfare enabling technologies sound like not countermeasures or pandemic preparedness? It sounds to me like biological warfare enabling technologies. And the reason why I have that hunch is what followed was he received, next to his NIAID grants, non-competitive DARPA grants in matching funds for over $140 million of aggregate funding going into his and his related programs on synthetic biological warfare enabling technologies. So do I have a problem calling the injection a biological warfare enabling technology? Absolutely not, because that's what they called it. And we know that they knew they called it that on September 18th, 2019. Because on September 18th, 2019, the racketeering, co-conspiring cabal of interlocking directorates, also known as the World Health Organization, said that they were going to conduct an experience for the world that was going to be a rapidly spreading pandemic due to a lethal respiratory pathogen. The lethality in that statement is the problem. They didn't say we're going to maybe get a little bit of sniffles going around. They said we were going to actually have the promulgation of a deadly agent. And the stated reason, in September 2020, the progress indicator is that the world would accept a universal vaccine. Not, we'll look at other options of treatment. Not, we'll have a look at what might be early intervention, as Dr. McCullough has so clearly advocated for in many, many, many instances. Not that. We stated on September 18th, 2019, we were intending to kill. And we were intending to kill to create the fear that would drive people to accept something that without coercion, no one would have accepted. And that's published by the criminal racketeers. Next slide, and there's only 2 to go if you're following. Deploy and profit from it. We were told investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process, and lo and behold, guess what they saw? Profit at the end of the process. 2022, $100 billion for Pfizer of public funds. Moderna, after lying to the Congress in October of 2020, when they were asked to actually verify whether NIAID was promoting an injection that would enrich NIAID, where Anthony Fauci and the entire team at NIH said that they had no financial interest in their recommendation, they receive a back payment royalty of $400 million for the first payment of the royalty. $400 million. More than any Institute of Health has ever received in a single payment for a single invention in the history of American medical research. And lo and behold, what do we receive after that? A request from the World Health Organization to expand its budget by 11% to make sure that the people who profited from it donate to it. And guess what they just did? They laundered the money right back. That's what they did. Next, and now you get the final slide. This is not a public health crime. This is actually not a constitutional crime. This is a criminal act done by a criminal institution established to enable criminal behavior since its foundation in 1947. That is what this is. And we should not be debating the merits of democracy or liberty or anything else, as irrational as that would be if we stood at a bank robbery and debated the merits of printing dollar bills. The problem is not the dollar bills, it's the bank robber. And the problem here is not health, and it's not public health, and it's not the suppression of information and the suppression of dissident views and the absolute unconscionable treatment of physicians around the world and academicians around the world who spoke out against this. That's not the crime. The crime is that we had criminal racketeers who conspired and developed a, quote, emergency. The same criminal racketeers planned, manufactured, and did all agency capture to make sure that you were told that you would use terms that they tell you to use: vaccine, face mask, health, social distancing, none of which had ordinary use definition. So we just used them. Criminal racketeers price fixed with interlocking directorates where known competitors came together and fixed prices in direct collusion, in violation of both European Union standards and in violation of both the Sherman and the Clayton Act in the United States. These were crimes. It was organized crime, and we should treat it as such. Criminal racketeers publicly lied under oath, and this resulted in the death and destruction of liberty, and most importantly, the death and destruction of the integrity of well-meaning people who sit here today doing everything they can within their power to try to treat the calamities created by this catastrophe. I will not for a moment denigrate the multiple contributions of amazing academic and medical professionals who've tried desperately to step into the gap and stop the corrupt outcomes of these crimes. But I will, without doubt, say the following: until we treat this as a criminal conspiracy of criminal racketeers resulting in global terrorism for the purpose of profiteering and murder, until we have that conversation, we're having the wrong conversation. Because we are not here to debate the merits of a modified agreement for a criminal racketeering organization. We are here to end the criminal organization itself. This is my call to every single person on this planet. Don't just limit the power of the WHO. Destroy the WHO. Thank you very much.
Dr. David Martin, you have to wonder why no action has been taken with all of the proof that this man has provided over the past couple of years. It's absolutely astounding. But so many people are just doing what they're told, just following orders, or they're making some money on the side, or they're scared. One more thing to hit you guys with tonight before we take off, and that is this. Hunter Biden has been hit with criminal firearms charges. I went to Al Jazeera for this one, not NBC Nightly News or CNN or the Washington Post or the New York Times, because they're all defending him, calling it politically motivated. Prosecutors accuse Hunter Biden of making false statements to acquire a firearm in 2018. U.S. court document shows. You can look that one up for yourself if you want a good laugh before you go to bed. And that is it for the show tonight, you guys. I hope you had a fantastic time here tonight. Hope you have a great rest of your night and a great day tomorrow. And I will talk to you again tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Central for another Shadoe at Night live stream. Until then, I love you all. And yes, I do. Even you. Bye for now.